crack in any of it that we could just like chip off? Ooh.
There you go.
That's perfect. That's geology in action. And how about this?
You do that.
You just like throw this on the ground.
That way you'll be the one talking up there. And I'll just be saying stupid things.
That works.
Glaciers.
So, we
main.
over it. This is the geology stuff.
They used to be kind of nice though, like when it was graphed out.
Yeah, I know.
Good afternoon. I am Matthew.
And I'm Ernesto.
And we're here studying Rock Canyon this afternoon.
Now, in a recent study, Annika Quick studied the volcanic activity of Craters of the Moon National Park in Idaho. And we know similar processes have occurred here at Rock Canyon.
Yeah, so we're about to take you up a little bit and show you an instance of a large vesicle. Before we begin our hike today, we'd really like to show you something that we found before we get to that cave that we mentioned. And obviously this is such a wonderful place and so many people going back and forth, but they have no idea the geological processes that have occurred here. This rock is an ancient erratic from a glacier that was here hundreds and thousands of years ago.
Now, we've always known that glaciers have cut through this area. However, Dr. Rupper performed an interesting study about the glaciation here at Rock Canyon. And in her study, she said, quote, that the glaciers were a lot larger than previously thought. And now, as we can see from this erratic, we had to have at least, I don't know, hundreds of meters of ice to move this thing and bring it from all the way up there in the above cliffs.
And as you'd like to take a look here at these striations on this erratic, it's very clear that either we had an episode of glacial flow from east-west, which is abnormal because normally it flows north-south. But if you take a look, you'd have to conclude that either we had that strange episode of east-west flow or that there's been some severe foliation of the topsoil. Excellent. As you can see here in the horizon, you can see a great giant tillite from an ancient glacier.
Hey Matt, I think you'll want to check this out.
Hey, let's go see what Ernie's found.
Now, what we're doing right here is taking a fresh piece of rock. It's kind of trying to determine the age. And by the looks of it, I'd say it's about 800 million years old. Which means that this rock here, this glacial rock, is a lot older, or slightly older, than the beach sediment that we have up there. And now, the only reasonable explanation I can come up for this is global warming. I mean, what could deposit, hundreds of feet of glacial sediment, and right next to it, about 1,000 feet of beach sediment. And even though this happened several million years ago, it's a possibility that this could happen today. I mean, we're already seeing the trends. If things go as projected, we could have a sea level about 2,000 feet above where we're at right now, which could be devastating to the community, obviously. And now, here's some more evidence of global warming. See right here, we have a little a water flow.
Well, I think what it is a groundwater extrusion right here. It's an extrusive groundwater sample. It's very rare in these parts, especially when it's an ancient glacier.
But groundwater extrusions are really indicative of global warming. I mean, you only get these when the weather's warmer, And so this flow could increase in flow volume, and it could really threaten development downstream. In fact, if this continued, I'd say in probably another 2 or 3 million years, we could see extensive global warming in this area. A lot. It's got a cottage cheese texture. I'd say probably a granite, which would go well with our theory of glaciation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can see the different inclusions in this granite, and granite is obviously extrusive, and so you're going to get little inclusions like this great large crystal right here, And granite is usually a lighter color, so I think you're right. I think this must be a granite.
And since the crystals indicate that it cooled faster, I would say that this is probably from the period of glaciation.
Now there, I think you're wrong. I think the cooling was a little bit slower than you're saying. It's indicative from this weathered look on the other side.
Yeah, it looks almost like a burnt look.
All right, well, we're about ready to show you the cave that we talked about before. It's an interesting thing, but before we tell you all about it, I want you to notice over here on these black outcroppings, the lower part we told you was the mineral forktillite, about 800 million years old, is what Ernie estimated by the look of it. But we've concluded that on top is not actually to be confused with the lower mineral forktillite, but it's actually an intrusive basalt.
Now the reason we can indicate that is because, as you'll see later on in the cave, we have a lava tube, you know, a magmatic flowway, and you don't really get those very often in glacial material. You usually get lava tubes, you know, in basalts.
You know, you're right, but it could also be a giant vesicle. We're going to go up there and examine and try and discover whether or not it's a giant vesicle in the basalt, the intrusive basalt, or whether or not it is a lava tube, like Ernie says. Excellent. Well, it looks like we got here a nice sample of our basalt, and we found inside this diamond, which is indicative of contact metamorphism.
Now that's a really interesting specimen, because as you can see, we do have like a layer of diamond here. My guess is that, like Matt said, we did have a period of magmatic intrusion. Now it is kind of weird how the magma came in side to side as opposed to its normal up and down motion, which you can tell from the cave. Most of the basalt has eroded away before the quartzite. But however, we do get these little deposits of diamond, just like a layer of diamond, on top of what looks like basaltic limestone.
The reason we're saying that this is a basalt, an intrusive basalt, and not a gabbro, which would be more common, because you can clearly see that there are no crystals here. You know, it's just plain black, and a basalt is defined as having no crystals. But the odd thing about that is there must have been some sort of ancient cooling system in order for the intrusive basalt to have become basalt and not gabbro.
Now another interesting thing I found out about this rock as I was examining it, if you'll take a look right here, what I'm doing is I'm pulling out my fingernail and just kind of giving it a scratch to determine its hardness. And you can see I do have some basalt here on my fingernail, which indicates that it's probably about a hardness of 2. I'd say this rock is probably rich in biotite, rich in those type of minerals. It's black colored and it's very soft, very brittle, I would say. Now another thing we forgot to mention while we were up in the cave is that these periodic eruptions of basalt have their impact on wildlife. Annika Quick did another report in which she studied the population of bats, and she found that these eruptions really threatened the bat population as well as other species. These threatened bats have lowered in population. They've migrated to other areas, and which really harms the ecosystem here in Rock Canyon.
Excellent. Now, according to Dr. Ruper's simple lake level model, we've been able to reconstruct a little bit of ancient Lake Bonneville by using the groundwater extrusion samples that we found here in the cliffs.
Something nerdy.
In order to do that more completely naturally, we've been able to take a look at these exclusive groundwater samples.
And now we were able to determine that the lake level stops about maybe 200 feet up that cliff where you see the residue stop.
Completely and accurately, we've been able to take a look at these exclusive groundwater.
Something nerdy.
We did. Another thing interesting to note is that the residue is black, which indicates that the water probably had a high olivine content, of high mica content, which would leave that residue, and which would also determine that the lake was probably very acidic.
Definitely, which also determines that there must be some more basaltic intrusions up there, which those minerals are very indicative of such an intrusion.
Indeed.
Excellent. Here we've come across an interesting indication of intense metamorphism. You know, it's indicative, as you can see, there were some gneissic banding here, and there's been some erosion of weaker minerals.
Alright, now these, these voids in the rock can really tell us about the type of rock that was being metamorphosed. Now, based on what it looks like, I would say we had a granite deposit, a magmatic extrusion, on top of a chalk deposit from shallow marine, which would create these voids. Obviously, chalk is really weak, so it would be the first to erode. And so what we have is very chalky soil, I would say, compared to very hard granite. Obviously, the crystals have melted away. It's been metamorphosed. Now what we have here is a prime example of slope failure. As you could see, we have a road here. It ends about just right where I'm standing. Now this road used to go all the way up Rock Canyon about 30 years ago, but what's happening is we have just very unstable slope. All the plants have been taken off the trail, which has caused the rocks to kind of creep over the trail, which means that that in several years we may not have a trail here. It may be covered just with rocks and sediment. And in fact,
I think I found some evidence, Ernie, of what you're saying. If you can look down here at these rocks, it looks like there's some. I just picked them up, and it looks like if you look under here, you can clearly see that there's a forward motion in this rock. It's definitely moving towards the road. And I think that's good evidence for what Ernie is telling us.
Another great example is if you look up here, where those rock climbers are, you can see that the gneiss formation is actually creeping over the trail. I'd give it about maybe 30 years, and you'll see that rock just overwhelm the trail. It'd probably cover that stream, and then we'd see probably some flash flooding, a lot of sediment just moving down towards the valley.
You're right, and this is especially dangerous because of the seismicity in this area. If there was to be an earthquake anytime soon, this entire mountainside would just move over. It's so unstable, and I just think that's indicative of how we need to treat our Mother Earth.
So basically what we learned from this trip is that we should find a way to decrease the precipitation in order to save the slopes that we've seen today.
Right, but also We need to find a way to maintain a cool climate.
Good point, yeah.
Tatusiu, dziś dzień wesoły, bo dzisiaj babcia córeczka dzień żeni. Dzisiaj wesele, jutro popra.